Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond. Nice to be back with y'all. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show, as you know, that brings you the libertarian perspective on the current issues of the day, the perspective that you're certainly not going to get in the mainstream media. Sheldon, there was another shooting over the weekend, this one in Maryland. And guy walks into a mall, shoots a couple of people, commits suicide. And when I read this, my initial reaction is, this can't be true. I mean, the media has to be lying about this. And why is that? It's because in Maryland, it's illegal to do this type of thing. I mean, they have very, very strict gun control laws. And so if they have strict gun control laws, how is it possible that somebody would walk into a mall with a gun and kill people? I mean, don't we know that gun control people that violate gun control laws are going to obey the law? I mean, here we are again facing the ridiculous inanity, the rationale goes behind gun control laws. And we all know violent people don't obey murder laws. Why are they going to obey gun control laws? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to check up on this, but I'm pretty sure that everywhere it's illegal to walk into a mall and kill people. Pretty sure that's across the board. I don't know this young man's story. He used a shotgun. I don't know what the laws are in Maryland. Shotguns, typically are not subject to gun controls. Although the buying of it, of course, is subject to the background checks. I don't know what this individual story is. I don't know where he got the gun, whether he owned it, whether he got it from parents or some other way, or stole it. But what you're getting at, of course, is the real issue there, because no matter what laws were on the books, even if there were comprehensive background checks as were being pushed last year and didn't get anywhere, that there would have nothing to stop this person from getting the gun, from a parent, from a neighbor, or from the black market, or stealing it. I mean, so background checks give a false sense of security that bad people won't get guns, and a lot of times, people can qualify even under a tough background check and still go out and kill somebody. A background check's no guarantee of what somebody's going to do in the future, so it gives people a false sense of security. This is one of the things we've tried to argue against when people have pushed background checks as if it was some kind of panacea that was going to, end murder as we know it by firearm. If only we could get background checks.
Yeah, this guy, from what I understand, bought the shotgun totally legally. He followed all the rules, all the regulations, walked in and bought a shotgun. And if this had been an assault rifle that he'd been used, I mean, you could already hear the gun control crowd saying, "Oh man, make it illegal to own assault rifles." And of course, he uses a shotgun, which is a weapon that a lot of people own for hunting and so forth. And so he goes in there, he does everything legal, he goes in there and kills these people. And the cops arrive, 3 to 5 minutes later, but too late to save these people and that he killed. And there's no indication as to whether he had a specific motive, what was going on with this guy. But, you've pointed this out, that the cops can't be everywhere all the time. I mean, this notion that you can rely on the police to protect you from a would-be murder is just nonsense. The cops, for one thing, you can't sue them if they don't do their jobs. They're under no real legal directive obligation to come to your assistance. They're not going to be held accountable if they don't. But most important, and I think this is the real issue here, is that what this law does in Maryland, where they don't have concealed carry there, it's very, very difficult to get a concealed carry permit in Maryland, is they deny people the ability to defend themselves against the would-be murderer. Now, we don't know whether these two people that were killed would have had a concealed carry permit, whether they would have had a gun with them. But the fact is that the law prohibited them from doing it. It denied them the ability to defend themselves against this guy. So here you have a gun control law that people comply with, the peaceful, law-abiding people, the victims, but the law that the murderer himself is never going to comply with, because if he doesn't give a hoot about murder laws, he's not going to give a hoot about gun control laws.
No, that's right, and that's the thing that the gun control side never really wants to address. They evade that question. They're rarely even given that question when they're interviewed on the media. I remember after the terrible shooting in Connecticut, the parents of some of the children, sad children who were killed, were lobbying for background check became the main bill, so they were lobbying for that. They were on television quite often, a few of them at least, being interviewed on CNN. I saw them quite a few times, and they were really being treated like children by the people interviewing them. It was like nobody wanted to ask them a hard question, I guess, out of sympathy for them, which is really sort of an insult. It's like, oh, okay, I won't ask you a tough question because you lost a child in a terrible incident, but here they are lobbying for legislation. It seems to me they've opened themselves up to tough questions. And I never heard them ask, has it ever occurred to you that the bill that you're lobbying for would not have saved your child? I mean, after all, that guy up there, that young guy that did the shooting at Sandy Hook, took his mother's guns, and she was qualified to own guns. He took guns from her supply, and she passed background checks. So no background check law would have stopped him. But nobody ever wants to ask that question of anybody. And so they get away with pretending that somehow this would prevent these terrible incidents. And when they do that, of course, then people aren't really thinking about what really might reduce those incidents or prevent those incidents. Nothing's going to 100% prevent incidents, because in any society, and particularly a more open society, people have the space to get away with doing bad things, or at least pulling off bad things. So there's no absolute guarantee, but the kind of things you're talking about, where there's concealed carry, increases the chances of prevention. It also increases the chances of deterrence, because if a person knows, or if a person really doesn't know who's armed, but he knows they can be armed, that's a pretty good deterrence. Because presumably one of these shooters doesn't want to go in and just be shot, right? He's trying to pull something off, or whatever he's doing. He's making some kind of statement. He wants to kill some people. If he thinks, well, I may get shot before I even get a chance to do that, and then what happens to my statement, of anger to the world, he may say, I'll write an angry letter to the editor instead. I mean, you don't know. The point is, the kind of ideas you're talking about, mainly legalizing concealed carry for everybody, helps us reduce the chances of these terrible incidents.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that these people target gun-free zones. Now, of course, this guy commits suicide after he commits these two murders, but clearly this plan of his involved more than just taking his own life. His plan was to take the lives of several other people. It looked like he had a lot more ammunition left. I think I'm not sure whether he had a bomb in there or not, but he clearly planned to take more lives before taking his own life. And so, the idea of concealed carry, and you and I would argue that a person should be able to conceal carry without a permit from the government. I mean, that's your right as a human being to be able to carry a gun. But let's go the concealed carry route. That the two victims themselves, as you point out, don't have to be carrying a concealed weapon. The fact that anybody in that mall might have a concealed carry permit might be enough to deter somebody. I mean, here in Virginia, which the guy obviously did not choose, a mall here in Virginia, he couldn't be certain of who's walking around that mall and who's carrying a gun. And so somebody that is carrying a gun, he has the ability to come to the defense of someone that isn't carrying a gun. And that's sometimes lost on people, is that you don't need to necessarily carry a gun. If you feel uncomfortable, you don't feel confident in this, it's a good feeling to know that there's other people around that mall that are very competent, that have a concealed carry permit, and can come to your defense. And I think that sometimes is lost in this whole quest to make it illegal for everyone to carry guns.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a free rider, a good free rider phenomenon there. We often talk about free rider problems, but here's a case where it's a free rider benefit. In other words, the person who doesn't choose to carry a concealed weapon will still benefit from the people around him or her who may be carrying. And so that uncertainty, an assailant can't know who's armed and who isn't armed, and doesn't know if the person right behind him may be armed and might intervene if that person sees, him pulling out his gun to shoot somebody. And people who are interested in concealed carry tend to be defense-oriented people. In other words, they're people who think about defense. They practice. They read up on this. It's something that's a concern on their minds, and they're the kind of people who would tend to come to the aid of innocent life. So someone who is not armed, if they catch an assailant, say, drawing a bead on someone just walking down a corridor in a mall, that's the very person who could intervene and save that person's life. You just don't know, and you certainly increase the chances of it if concealed carry is legal. You mentioned permits. I agree with you. The permitting, I suppose better than nothing, is that in itself does not satisfy the standards of freedom. And there are a few states in the union, like Vermont, I think Arizona, Arizona and Alaska, where you don't need a permit at all. And in some of those states, I think open carry is involved as well as concealed carry. But there, you don't even need a permit in those couple of states. There may be one or two others I'm not thinking of, but that's an important thing. You want to create uncertainty in the minds of any would-be killer. And like you said earlier, the police have no legal obligation. There are court cases to this effect. This is settled law. You could be on a corner being mugged, and a policeman could be on the opposite corner, standing there and even observing you. And you can't sue the town that you're in, or the police department, or that policeman, privately in civil court. Now, maybe politically something would happen, right? There may be political pressure to do something, but that's not the same. You can't say, hey, I have a contract, don't I? I'm a taxpayer. I have a contract. Where's my protection? You'll get laughed out of court. It's not a contractual relationship. They don't guarantee anything. The most they guarantee is they're a vague deterrence because just they're out there. Well, that's not very good. There's one person will be with you at any time of day if you're ever assaulted. That's you. So there's no way you can really shed the self-responsibility for protection.
Well, and I remember when all the stuff was coming out on concealed carry in the early days where states were adopting it, that people were saying, oh, this is going to result in big shootouts in the malls. And here in Virginia, they had an exception where you couldn't carry your weapon into a place where they served alcohol, which meant, you couldn't carry it into a restaurant, which then converts it into a gun-free zone. And, the anti-gun controllers succeeded in getting that repealed. And people were, the gun control crowd was saying, oh, this means there's going to be shootouts in bars. People are going to lose their temper. They're going to be drunk. There's been absolutely nothing of that, nothing. And so really the kind of society we're talking about where people are free to keep guns is what we've been saying here, is that it's a safer society. Knowing that you're walking around in a mall, okay, there's people with weapons concealed, but they're obviously not murderers. I mean, your murderer is not going to go down there and march in and get a concealed carry permit so that he can go out and kill people. Again, murderers don't care about concealed carry permit laws. They don't care about gun control laws. They don't care about murder laws. And so really the question is, how do we defend ourselves from these people? And that's the whole idea of concealed carry. Now, what the gun control crowd also says, though, even, if they finally can be persuaded in that argument, they'll say, well, okay, but the ideal is to wipe out all guns in society. Just make it a totally gun-free society, and therefore if there's no guns, then there won't be any murders. Well, of course, there are going to be murders with knives and so forth, if that's the case, or strangulation or whatever. But their ideal is a gun-free society. And so if you say, well, making it illegal in Maryland, what good's that going to do? You got guns in Virginia. They say, oh, well, okay, well, then we'll make it, illegal in Virginia. Well, they got to make it illegal all across the country. But even then, what does that accomplish? You got these, how many guns out there in the market already? Millions of guns. So all of a sudden you got a black market in guns, and we've seen the black market in drugs. I mean, can you imagine the violence, the gang wars, all the drug war stuff transferred to a war over guns? And so it's all a pipe dream. The notion that you could make the United States into a gun-free zone, I mean, let's face it, the only people in that society that are going to be owning the guns are the cops, the military, and the murderers, the gangs, and so forth. They're going to be using those weapons. What they would end up doing is disarming all of us, because most of us don't want to subject ourselves to the risk of a felony conviction, 10, 20 years in the penitentiary, and then they disarm us against those who would initiate force against us.
Right. The idea that the country could be gun-free is absurd. During the Vietnam War, when U.S. bombing was destroying munitions factories, Viet Cong were making the equivalents of AK-47s in backyard foundries. So and now we know that you can make a gun with a 3D printer. We know from Cody Wilson having demonstrated that. So that's absurd. But I would take it even further. I think you were implying this. Even if you could do it, let's make the amazing assumption that you could make all guns disappear. Not only any new manufacturer, but even you could wave a wand and all the existing guns would disappear. So you couldn't be a black market. And let's assume you can't make one in your backyard and you can't make one with a 3D printer. So there's really zero guns. Why would that be a desirable world? Like you said, there are many other ways to kill people. You can kill people with your fists, okay? You don't even need a tool or a weapon because you're born with weapons. Who tends to be bigger and stronger in the world as we know it? Men tend to be bigger and stronger than women. It's just a biological fact in the physical sense. Women then are at a disadvantage if they don't have what Sam called the great equalizer, right? So a world literally without guns, that wouldn't be without bad people. It would just be without guns. They're not claiming they're going to make evil people disappear. Good luck with that. I hope you can do it, but I don't see how you're going to do it. That will leave women and other people who are weaker and smaller than the average, vulnerable to bad people who are bigger and stronger. Why is that a desirable vision? It seems very unattractive to me. I would much rather have women being able to own guns, be trained, and carry and take their own responsibility for their self-defense. That I think would be a much better world.
Absolutely, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's also a great deterrent too. If a would-be rapist knows that women are free to be armed and he doesn't know who's armed and who isn't, that might deter him. Especially if a woman can pull a small pistol out of her purse and fire at a guy who's intent on raping her. And I think we also need to point out that the ultimate idea of gun ownership behind the Second Amendment, what our founding fathers had in mind, what our ancestors had in mind, it wasn't just protection against violent criminals. It wasn't just the right to hunt deer, as so many gun advocates sometimes propose. We've got to talk in terms of resistance to tyranny. That if you have a disarmed society, you're going to have a very, very obedient and compliant society if a tyrannical regime ever gets a hold of power. And there are those who are saying, oh, that could never happen in the United States. That's nonsense. It can happen anywhere. And nobody's above it. And you see it in these totalitarian nations. You see it in Egypt right now, where you have the epitome of military dictatorship. And, there's some violence going on, but by and large, people are, they're having to, import weapons that are resisting this tyranny from Syria or Libya or what have you, which of course encourages the military dictatorship, that the fact that people don't have widespread gun ownership. When you have widespread gun ownership, would-be tyrants think twice about imposing their tyranny. And if they do decide to have their tyranny, that doesn't mean that people are necessarily going to revolt, but at least they have the option of revolting if the tyranny becomes horribly oppressive. And history has shown repeatedly that gun ownership is sometimes the only means by which you have to protect yourself from a regime that's raping, torturing, killing the citizens. Maybe with the best of motives. And that was the real guide behind that Second Amendment.
I don't know why people think it would be a good idea for the state to have all the guns. That doesn't sound very comforting. We know that every day police are abusing innocent people all over the country. You don't have to do much searching on the internet to find well-documented stories. They even make the newspapers. Well-documented stories of repeated abuses, of people being beaten, not only harmed or killed with police firearms, but just being beaten. And so a gun-free society, if such a thing could be achieved, would mean that the state would have all the guns, and that would even leave people even more vulnerable to this daily abuse that's going on. The other thing is that one thing the pro-gun people don't even understand is how the effort to stamp out guns intersects with the effort to stamp out drugs, the drugs that have been declared, illegal and verboten. These two wars feed on each other. And if you don't like the war on guns, but you support the war on drugs, you're working against yourself. And that people need to understand that, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, when you see how the U.S. government reacts when it invades countries and conquers foreign regimes and occupies countries, I find it fascinating that the first thing they do is confiscate arms and make it illegal to own guns. And really, what they're doing is saying, well, we want you to obey. We want you to comply with what we're ordering you to do. And so instead of trying to enshrine the principles that America was founded on, the principles of gun ownership that's protected by the Second Amendment, you instead do the exact opposite in these countries. And let's face it, Sheldon, I mean, in my opinion, the Second Amendment should have been made first, because the First Amendment is nothing in the absence of the Second Amendment. Freedom of speech, the right to criticize government officials, the right to dissent. Those things are going to be nullities in a society in which government officials know that the citizenry have no means to resist the oppression, the suppression of those particular rights. So as long as government officials know people have the means to revolt, they're going to have much more respect for the First Amendment and the rest of the fundamental rights of a citizenry.
Yeah, there was another point I wanted to make, maybe relates more to the earlier discussion, but it's still relevant. Is that dishonest accounting that's done on this whole subject, because we constantly are hearing about how many people are murdered with firearms every year, tens of thousands. I don't know what the number is right now. And there's no attention given to the number of lives saved with firearms. Usually not by firing it, but really by showing it. Now, the Cato Institute has a paper on this by Clayton Kramer and a co-author who keep up on this stuff very well. And it's very hard to do the statistics because most of the incidents aren't reported. They do a very good job of giving us an indication of how many lives are saved every year, how many times guns are used. And when I say used, that can mostly mean just showing it, not shooting it, to ward off a crime and possibly murder. But that never gets talked about. I mean, there have been incidents where what might have been a mass murder was aborted early on because of a gun. There was a case of a law school, I think called the Law School of the Appalachians, something like that, a few years ago. It hardly ever gets talked about, but you can find it online, where a disgruntled student went into the school and was going to shoot people. Two students ran to their car to get their guns. They weren't allowed to have them on campus, unfortunately. They ran to their cars, though, brought them back, and stopped that incident. Now, maybe there was only one or two people shot. This guy looked like he was going to be shooting a lot of people. And there are other cases like that. They never get talked about. The media, I think, are biased generally about this. And so while locally you may read stories about how a store owner saved his life and his customers because he had a gun on him, that never gets picked up nationally. It's not regarded as newsworthy nationally. And yet if you add all those incidents up every year, it comes to quite a few. Guns save lives. If all you hear is how guns murder people, then if you're not thinking much about it, you're going to say, guns, handguns or these rifles, these are terrible things. Look at all the people they murder. If you never see the other side of the ledger, how can you possibly even make a fair empirical judgment? Setting apart libertarian principles, just looking at it sort of purely consequentially, would you? Your impression might be, what good do these things do? I just hear about people getting murdered because they never tell you about all the people whose lives are saved. I mean, that's bias. It may not be really, really conscious, although in a lot of cases it may be, but that is a bias, and it is biasing and distorting people's judgment on this very important issue. Yeah,
I recently read a story of an elderly woman whose house was broken into by a young guy. He was like 17, 16, something like that. He had a gun, and he forced her upstairs to open her safe where she had some money. And she opens the safe and pulls out a gun that she had hidden there in the safe. And she was faced with a split-second decision, but she had grandchildren down in a house. She was convinced this guy was going to kill her grandchildren. She turned around and shot the guy. And he made it out on the lawn and went down a couple of houses and then just keeled over and died. And so she was able to protect herself because she had that gun. But your point about the drug war is fascinating, because my thought is, I wonder if this young kid, which is a tragedy that, this kid loses his life, but suppose he was in there to get some quick money for a drug addiction. And we all know that there are so many muggings and robberies and thefts and burglaries that are attributed because of the drug war, the exorbitant prices that addicts must pay as compared to a wino. You never hear a wino, breaking in or robbing people to get the money to pay for a bottle of wine. And so here is your perfect confluence. Now, I don't know if that's what was motivating this kid, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me. But we see it all the time where people are mugging other people and possibly losing their lives in the process. So here's you have the confluence of the drug war and the war on guns. And unfortunately, instead of just legalizing drugs and admitting that the war is a bad war, the drug war, people start calling for gun control measures. So it's your classic concept of one government intervention leading to another. And let me say one more point about this, that is this value of human life. Why is this happening so much in American society? And people say, it's because there's so many guns available. I don't buy it. I think that you've got to go deeper than this, and this is where the U.S. national security state and its constant policies of killing people overseas, I think, plays an important role here, one that we don't like to acknowledge because we all want to assume it's just a normal part of life. But when you're assassinating people overseas, your government is assassinating people on a daily basis, dropping bombs on people, killing any number of people, and just nonchalantly acting like, it's just collateral damage, and it's just a wedding party, and it's just a combatant, it's just a terrorist. I mean, when it's inculcated in people's mindset that there is effectively no value of human life, at least overseas, how can that not seep into the consciousness and subconscious of the people over here? And I think that clearly is a role here.
No, I think the government generates the culture of violence, and it does spread to other things like video games. And there are a lot of video games that simulate warfare in Iraq or Afghanistan, and maybe people who would like to go but for one reason or another can't go, play games. And I'm not saying games lead to people actually committing violence. I don't think the research supports that. Plenty of people play games and never do anything violent against a real person. But there may be some number of people that it does excite the taste for violence. The point is, it doesn't help to have the government engaging in this, because I think it does affect people. People know what's going on, and it makes it seem more permissible. There's enemies out there, and then you get this whole enemy syndrome, enemy mindset. We have to be, ever vigilant against our enemies, and the government feeds all that. Another way that the drug war intersects, to relate to something you said just previously, is not just that people might want to pull robberies to support their drug use. I don't know if that my hunch is that this was not involved in this incident, because it seems to me you wouldn't, holding up a store in a mall is a pretty risky thing to do because you got to get out of the mall. But you have gangs because the drug trade is illegal. It's turned over to a lot of violent people, including gangs, and those people have the money to be very well armed to protect their turf, and all of that gives guns a bad name. The cops can constantly say we're outgunned. They have better material, better ammunition and better equipment than we have. So we need more tax money, to fight them, and that gives the whole that puts a whole face on the gun culture, which I don't think would exist in the absence of the war on drugs. So the two, I think, do go together, and they should fall together.
Yeah, you see this especially in Mexico, where you have people arming themselves in certain communities and forming themselves into coalitions to battle the drug gangs. And so you have this constant violence, and there's always going to be innocent people that are caught in the crossfire. And now you've got the military come in and trying to disarm the law-abiding citizens that are battling against the drug gangs and violating civil liberties and privacy. When there's a simple solution: legalize drugs. Just get rid of this drug war. Admit it's been a failure. It's been like 50 years or so, just like failure that the war on guns has been. But we're out of time. But let me remind anybody that's tuning in on this show that we've got a great conference within a conference coming up February 15th. It's the Students for Liberty Conference at the Grand Hyatt in Washington, D.C. Take a look at their website, Students for Liberty, and then take a look at our website at fff.org for our lineup of our conference within a conference. We've got an outstanding lineup of people who are going to be addressing the war on terrorism, foreign policy, civil liberties, and our featured panel is so exciting. We've got Oliver Stone, the award-winning, Academy Award-winning Hollywood director, and then we've got Jeremy Scahill, whose movie Dirty Wars just got nominated for an Academy Award. So we got an Academy Award winner and an Academy Award nominee, and then Stone's collaborator, Peter Kuznick, on his Untold History series on Showtime. It's fantastic. It's going to be a 90-minute presentation with lots of audience discussion. It's not just limited to students. Anybody can come to this. The registration fee is nominal. I think for non-students it's $50 or something for the whole conference, not just our section of it. So we'd love to have you come. It's a great opportunity. Come and mix with libertarians. We're trying to get a lot of liberal students as well. We've sent out letters to political science departments in the area so they can mingle with libertarian students. So love to have you join us. Anyway, that's the show. Sheldon, enjoyed it as always, and we'll see you next time.